It is very clear that the Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, is anti-France and anti-West. Even before he became the Prime Minister, Sonko had been quite vocal against France's presence in Senegal and the African continent. However, the Senegalese president has not really been seen as anti-France or anti-West. For example, a few months ago, he paid a visit to France to discuss deepening relations between Senegal and France. Besides this, he has repeatedly stated that he planned to change the relationship between France and Senegal to one based on mutual benefit. This is different from the rigid stance taken by the military leaders of the Sahel region, who completely ended any form of relationship with their former colonial masters. So, it came as a surprise when a few days ago, President Faye demanded that France shut down its military bases in Senegal. The question is Faye becoming anti-France? Or is this what he meant by changing the relationship between France and Senegal? Let's find out. On Thursday, November 28, 2024, Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye Faye urged France to shut down its military bases in Senegal. This announcement comes as Senegal prepares to commemorate the 80th anniversary of a notorious colonial-era massacre. Interestingly, on the same day, French President Emmanuel Macron acknowledged for the first time that the French army was responsible for the massacre of Senegalese soldiers in 1944. President Macron made this known in a letter addressed to the Senegalese authorities. There is no doubt that the only reason France is acknowledging this as a massacre is because France is losing influence in Africa. But what exactly happened in 1944? Well, the Thiaroye Massacre, as it is called, took place on December 1, 1944, when between 35 and 400 West African soldiers who fought alongside the French army during World War II were shot dead by French troops. After fighting the war, these soldiers who had done their job were sent back home to the Thiaroye military camp in Dakar, Senegal. But they were sent back without any financial pay which they deserved and under poor conditions. These made the soldiers angry and eventually led to a mutiny in the camp. The French brigadier general at the time decided to make a show of force to bring it back under his authority. There is no complete account of exactly how it happened, but on December 1, 1944, a shootout occurred in the camp which led to the death of several of the soldiers and wounded many more. The official report of December 2nd states that 24 of the mutineers were killed outright and 45 were wounded, 11 of which subsequently died of their wounds. However, according to an article published in November 2023, some veterans later claimed that the death toll actually reached as high as 300 dead. Now here is where it gets interesting. In 1945, 34 of the mutineers, who were thought to be the instigators of the insurrection, were tried and given sentences ranging from 1 to 10 years of prison. But that's not all. The widows of the soldiers who had died were never awarded any veteran pensions. The worst part is that there was no investigation in the matter, and the French authorities claimed that the soldiers were troublesome and prone to revolt. In addition to this, France did everything to cover the incident, which is why the Thiaroye Massacre is not so popular outside Senegal. It was never taught in schools in France, and a Senegalese film about the massacre released in 1988, Camp de Thiaroye, was both banned in France and censored in Senegal. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can get more videos like this. So, as we said earlier, the only reason why the French president is acknowledging the massacre is because he knows that France is losing influence in Africa. The letter sent by President Macron was received by President Faye, who said that Macron's step should open the door so that the whole truth about this painful event of Thiaroye can finally come out. We have long sought closure on this story, and we believe that this time, France's commitment will be full, frank, and collaborative, he added. It was at this point that Faye stated that the French military base in Senegal was not what Senegal needed right now. According to Faye, Macron's recognition of the massacre is a good thing, but maintaining French military bases in Senegal undermines the country's sovereignty. He said, "Historically, France enslaved, colonized, and stayed here. Obviously, I think that when you reverse the roles a little, you will have a hard time conceiving that another army, China, Russia, Senegal, or any other country could have a military base in France." Speaking during an interview at the presidential palace, Faye stated that Senegal is an independent country. It is a sovereign country, and sovereignty does not accept the presence of military bases in a sovereign country. However, Faye added that this does not mean that he plans to sever ties with France like Burkina Faso and Niger did. Today, China is our largest trading partner in terms of investment and trade. Does China have a military presence in Senegal? No. Does that mean our relations are cut? No. Now currently, there are about 350 French soldiers in Senegal, and prior to this time, France had announced that it planned to reduce the number of forces from 350 to 100. This means that France still intends to maintain its military base in Senegal. However, President Faye is saying that Senegal doesn't need French soldiers or French bases, meaning that in the next few months, we should see France leaving Senegal. This is remarkable. While France remains a key partner in trade and investment, Faye acknowledged that France's apology for the Thiaroye Massacre marked an important step forward. Faye called Macron's acknowledgement a great step, but also expressed his intention to seek further reparations. To recognize that a massacre has been committed must obviously have the effect of making amends. We think that naturally this is what must follow, he added. President Faye's decision to shut down the French military base in Senegal is a commitment to the words spoken by Senegal's Prime Minister a few months ago. During an interview, the Prime Minister spoke on several issues, particularly the presence of foreign military bases in Senegal and Africa. According to him, the presence of foreign military bases in the country raises some legitimate questions. In his own words, more than 60 years after our independence, we must question the reasons why the French army, for example, still benefits from several military bases in our country and the impact of this presence on our national sovereignty and our strategic autonomy. He went on to reference how on 2 occasions, France refused to entertain the idea of a U.S. military base in the country and justified the decision by saying that France had the will and right to dispose of a will that is incompatible with the defense organization in which it will be subordinated. Therefore, like France, Senegal has the will and right to dispose of itself, a will that is incompatible with the sustainable presence of foreign military bases in the country. Sonko went on to say that this does not question the defense agreement Senegal maintains with other countries, including the United States, Great Britain, and China. This means that the issue is not the defense agreement with other countries, but rather it is the fact that these agreements have led to the establishment of so many foreign military bases across the continent. In Senegal, the Prime Minister revealed that a third of the Dakar region is currently occupied by foreign military bases. Imagine that. How can a third of a particular region be occupied by foreign military bases? For the sovereignty and security of a country, this is certainly not safe. This is why we applaud the decisions of the military authorities in the Sahel region, who took the first step towards kicking out foreign military forces and shutting down their bases. Now, if you type into Google, how many African countries have military bases in Western countries, you will be surprised that Google's search results will not show answers like 5 African countries or 6 African countries, but rather answers from Western countries. Countries with military bases in Africa. The African continent has been flooded with hordes of foreign military personnel for decades, and more than a dozen countries are known to have deployments or bases on the continent. According to a 2019 report by the South African Institute for Security Studies, there are at least 13 countries with a military presence in Africa and about 11 foreign military bases in the Horn of Africa. These Western countries include the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and even India. However, not a single country in Africa has a military base outside the continent. The question is, why do so many countries have military bases in Africa, and why does Africa allow them to do so? Do these foreign military bases serve African interests, or are there deeper motives? Of the 13 countries with military bases in Africa, the United States and France have the largest bases and forces on the continent, although the number of French troops has been significantly reduced recently following its withdrawal from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Currently, 7,000 U.S. soldiers are stationed in Africa on a rotational basis. These troops conduct joint operations with African forces against extremists and jihadists. They are housed in military bases across the continent, including Uganda, South Sudan, Senegal, Gabon, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In addition, 2,000 U.S. soldiers are engaged in training missions in 40 African countries. American Special Forces operate from so-called forward operating bases in Kenya and Somalia in East Africa. Interestingly, while media had previously reported that the U.S. in Africa only has one permanent camp in Djibouti, known as Camp Lemonnier, recently leaked 2019 documents revealed that the U.S. has a total of 29 bases in 15 African countries. Imagine that. But the question is, why would the U.S. have 29 bases in Africa? We will explain this later. But, like the U.S., France also has troops stationed or bases in many African countries. The country had more than 7,500 soldiers stationed on the continent until coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger drove out its troops. But the presence of foreign troops in Africa is not limited to Western countries. China has been particularly active in its military presence in the Horn of Africa. Its efforts have grown since it joined a multinational anti-piracy mission in the Gulf of Aden in 2008. Since then, China has maintained an anti-piracy naval presence in the Horn of Africa and the Gulf of Aden. From 2008 to 2018, the Chinese Navy deployed 26,000 soldiers in various maritime security operations. In 2017, China opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti. This was after the U.S. established Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti in 2003. India is another Asian country that is expanding its naval presence in Africa. The country is building a network of military facilities across the Indian Ocean to counter China's growing military influence in the region. As for the Middle East, Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, are two countries with significant military presence in Africa. Turkey opened a military base in Mogadishu, Somalia in 2017, while the UAE has had a military base in Eritrea since 2015. From all this, it's clear that there are so many foreign military bases in Africa, yet Africa doesn't have a single base outside the continent. So, why the existence of so many military bases in Africa? The first obvious reason is for resource exploitation. Africa is the second largest continent in the world in terms of land area and population, and is rich in significant natural resources. Africa alone contains 30% of all mineral reserves, 12% of known oil reserves, 8% of known natural gas, and 65% of the world's arable land area. However, the power of Western multinational corporations and the lack of industrialization in most African countries have led the continent to become dependent on foreign powers. This state of dependency was structured by the policies of the colonizers, who maintained economic activity in Africa based on the extraction and cultivation of raw materials, and then passed it on to generations of post-colonial elites who did nothing to change this structure. This state of continued economic dependency creates opportunities for manipulation by foreign governments with a permanent interest in Africa. This is why foreign countries, for example, the United States or the United Kingdom, offer assistance to a certain African country if it wants to set up a base, in exchange for setting up a military base on its soil. Also, the economic situation of African countries has led to conflicts, which the United States, France, and others have taken advantage of to set up military bases in the name of conflict resolution. However, in reality, the facts show that these countries set up military bases near areas of mineral resources in Africa. Take, for example, the U.S. military base in the lily pad of São Tomé and Príncipe on the Gulf of Guinea. If asked, the U.S. would answer that the reason for having this military base in the Gulf of Guinea is to curb the growth of Islamic extremism, particularly ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the governments of these African countries agree that these groups have no threatening presence there. So why is America having a military base there? Simply to protect the shipment of oil from Nigeria and the Gulf of Guinea to the U.S. Another example that justifies the assumption that foreign military bases serve the exploitation of African resources is an incident that occurred in 2007. In that year, about 1.7 billion barrels of oil were discovered on the Congo-Uganda border in the Lake Albert region. Guess what happened next? The region was immediately militarized by the U.S. military. The second reason for having foreign military bases in Africa is to stop Africans from migrating to Europe and the Western world. Austerity policies driven by the IMF and World Bank and the failure of African countries to manage the sale of raw materials in a way that would allow their citizens to live a decent life have led to mass migration across the continent. To stop this massive migration and to keep migrants as far away as possible from their borders, Western countries have set up military bases in Africa, especially in the Sahel region. And guess what? France claims to have launched the G5 Sahel initiative to counter the terrorism crisis unfolding in the region. In fact, preventing the migration of African refugees to the country is one of the main reasons why France launched the G5 Sahel initiative. One cannot overlook why the United States built a large drone base in Agadez that provides crucial aerial surveillance of the migration in the region. You can imagine the hypocrisy. Western countries want Africa's resources, but they don't want Africa's population. Now, according to political analyst Reciba Tefo, the third reason for foreign military bases is in case of war. According to Reciba, superpowers compete to at least station their troops in strategic locations so that they have access to resources and ammunition if they need to wage any war. This means that it is easier for the US to invade if an African country decides to do so. This is the reason for the war between Russia and Ukraine. NATO wants to station weapons in Ukraine so that they can be as close as possible to Russia if necessary. But Russia does not allow this. It is really surprising that African leaders allow military bases to be established abroad, knowing the risks. If it brings benefits, why doesn't the US have foreign military bases on its territory? This leads us to the point that the reason why all these foreign countries can easily set up military bases in Africa is because of weak African governments and weak organizations like the African Union. The president of Djibouti is a good example of an African leader who allowed foreign countries, including the US, France, and China, to set up military bases in his country in exchange for some benefits. These benefits include minimal protection of the land on which the bases are built and protection from rebels. Ghana is another example. In 2018, the U.S. Defense Department proposed that the U.S. and Ghana agree to a Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA, a $20 million pact that would allow for the expansion of the U.S. military presence in Ghana. But the proposal was rejected by the public and the opposition, as they thought the agreement would mean the U.S. could establish military bases in the country. And in April that year, the Ghanaian president claimed that the Ghanaian government has not provided and will not provide military bases to the United States of America. But a Status of Forces Agreement was signed in May 2018, and as far as we can tell from the binding document, the U.S. is allowed to establish its own military facilities in Ghana. By any definition, this means that a base can be established. Recently, there has been growing concern about the proliferation of bases on the African continent, but unfortunately, that is where it ends. No steps have been taken to stop these foreign countries from setting up military bases in African countries that we would never tolerate. It is clear that these countries see the African continent as a weak child that will accept anything we throw at it. The African Union is not helping either. Its ability to stop other countries from setting up military bases is limited by the fact that it is 98% funded by external partners such as the European Union. The fact is that truly independent countries will not voluntarily allow other countries to establish military bases on their territory. Ever since Western countries began establishing bases on African soil, some African leaders have been calling for the closure of these bases, arguing that these foreign bases represent a departure from the anti-imperialist ideals of the struggle that brought independence to Africa. In 1964, Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser called for the closure of these bases. And after Muammar Gaddafi overthrew the monarchy in 1970, the bases were closed. Recently, some African heads of state have also called for the closure of these bases, but unfortunately, that is all it has been, just talks. But we applaud the efforts of African countries such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, who have made this a deity in their countries. And now that Senegal is following suit, we hope that it also becomes a reality. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.